So being a channel all about Pixar, I really haven't talked about my opinions on the movies all that much. And surprisingly, a lot of my opinions are actually really unpopular. And just to make this clear, I really do love all these movies. But if they had to be ranked, some of them would be better than others. So let's start this list out with Coco. Yeah, we're getting that unpopular. Right off the bat, it makes no sense why Miguel's mom is so against music. She believes that Hector left the family to pursue a musical career, when in reality he was actually killed. But now she uses that as an excuse to attack random people on the street. Then the movie just drags a lot during the middle portion, and it's mostly just Miguel trying to walk around the land of the dead and avoid being seen. But the worst part about this movie is Ernesto de la Cruz. It's so typical now to have an idol that the main character looks up to and then later on reveal that they're actually a twist villain. And he has no redeeming quality, so it's hard to see him as anything but just an obstacle in the way. Next is The Good Dinosaur, and this movie I really don't have much to say about because I feel like I'm just watching a dinosaur walk around a landscape for an hour and a half. I like how it gives a proper start to the Pixar theory, but other than that, it feels like more of just a graphics test than anything. So next is Brave, which is a movie I feel like didn't reach its full potential. The themes that this movie set up I feel like were explored way better in Turning Red. Next is Finding Dory, which is a decent backstory to an otherwise just comedic relief character. It's a movie that wasn't needed but nice to have, and it tells a pretty decent story. Then we have Onward, which is a movie I feel like would have been way better if we had a prologue scene in the beginning, similar to Finding Nemo, so then we could better understand Ian's motives and why he so badly wants to meet his dad. Because it's hard to care about a character that we know absolutely nothing about. Then there's Pixar's newest movie, Lightyear, which I've only seen one time as of right now, so I don't have a fully developed opinion on it yet, but the whole time travel aspect was just really confusing, and it made it hard to keep track of the plot. Being confusing is good for theories, but not so good for the storyline. And it has similar themes to Up about not obsessing over life regrets. And Zurg is meant to be a representation of what you could become if you obsess over a mistake of the past. So overall, I like it, but I have to watch it again. Now we have Incredibles 2. I like this movie because it's The Incredibles, but I feel like it would have been better if they had a significant time jump. Because all this movie really did is just tie the one loose plot thread of supers still being illegal. I think it would have been a lot more interesting if Violet, Dash, and Jack Jack grew up and had kids of their own, and had to find their way in a world who still hated supers. It could have taken place in the late 80s, early 90s, around the time of Toy Story. And now here's the one everyone hates on, Cars 2. But I have to defend this movie because it accomplishes everything it's going for. It's up to you if you like what it's going for, but it definitely does succeed at it. You can't tell me that this isn't good at being a spy movie. It does fall short on giving Mater much character growth. I think it would have worked a lot better if it just focused on Finn and Holly being the main characters, and functioned as more of a Cars spin-off rather than being called Cars 2. But I have to admit, I loved this movie when it came out. Then following up Cars 2 is Cars 3. It feels like a proper ending to the Cars franchise. However, my minor gripe with this movie is that Cruz was able to beat Jackson Storm even though Lightning McQueen couldn't. Even though earlier in the film she couldn't even beat Lightning McQueen. But overall, it's pretty solid. Next is Luca, which is a movie I have a hard time explaining why I like it. I just like the unique setting, being set in Italy during summertime in the 1950s. It has a simplistic storyline, but it works. Next we have Toy Story, which is one of Pixar's funniest films. The dynamic between Buzz and Woody is just really funny in this film because they both think each other are crazy. This was the first full-length CG film and a great start for Pixar. Next is Toy Story 3. This was the first movie I ever saw in theaters, and it's a movie you could appreciate as you get older. I really love the incinerator scene because it shows how much the toys' relationships have developed over the movies. And in this moment, they're fully willing to accept their fate. It does seem like a bailout when they get saved by the aliens, but in this case they really had no choice. Because if they just had it end here, that wouldn't have been a satisfying ending. Next up is Ratatouille. I really love the message of this movie that everyone has the same potential to be great no matter who you are. And I love how it makes you question the morals of our society. And speaking of society, the next movie is A Bug's Life. I love the message about how the world tries to reject anyone who tries to be original or go against popular opinion. And how society would be so much stronger if we stopped fighting each other and stood as one. And I love how it uses an ant colony as a metaphor for that. And I also love how Hopper is a genuinely scary villain. Next up on the list is Toy Story 4. This movie many felt was unnecessary, but it was actually completely necessary. Because even after Andy gives his toys away in Toy Story 3, you're still left with the question, what about when Bonnie grows up? Toy Story 3 only felt like the ending of Chapter 1 of Toy Story. I have two issues with this movie though. The first being Bo Peep. To start, I feel like they changed her too much from how she was in the original movies. And I also don't like how she goes against everything Woody's trying to accomplish. And my second problem is it goes against all the themes that the past 3 Toy Story movies set up. We hear time and time again that a toy's only purpose is to be there for their kid, not to go off on their own and be a lost toy. I really do like Woody's shifting character of becoming a lost toy, but I just don't like how Bo Peep was able to convince him so quickly. And then one more smaller issue I have is how Bonnie just disregards Woody, even though she made Andy give him up before he went to college. But other than that, I do really like this movie. The next movie is Up. Everyone remembers the opening scene of this movie, but it's so much more than just that. That sequence is what sets the mood for the rest of the movie, and it shows his journey of realizing that even though he didn't go to Paradise Falls with Ellie, they did so many other things in their life together. And now he needs to spend the rest of his life doing what makes him happy, instead of obsessing over the past. Now we have Finding Nemo. The best thing this movie did is set up a prologue so you understand Marlin's motives from the very beginning, something that I really wish Onward did. And it does a great job of continuing its themes throughout the movie. Some people might say I put this movie too high on the list, but the next movie is Cars. I think people forget how amazing this movie is because they aren't a fan of the sequels. But this movie gives Lightning McQueen the perfect arc, and it also does a great job of putting you inside his head. From the beginning, it starts with this exciting race sequence. You see how bad he wants to win the Piston Cup, and that makes you root for him. We see Chick as the antagonist, but just because he's not the main character, that's why we see him as the bad guy. But through the course of the film, it makes you realize that Lightning wasn't any better than him. And a lot of what is shown in this movie is reflective of the real world. Radiator Springs is like a town lost in time, with older cars who hold up traditional American values, with the newer generation only so obsessed with fame and glory. I love how by the time the media finds him, it's almost like Lightning's old life came back to haunt him, and winning a race is the last thing on his mind at this point. Just such a great shift in character and a great lesson to be learned. Next we have Soul. This movie was actually a really pleasant surprise, and it really feels like the embodiment of a Pixar movie. It's the kind of movie that just makes you feel like getting up and doing something with your life. And it makes you realize that everyone has the same potential to be great, but only those willing to pursue it are the ones who live a successful and fulfilling life. Now this next movie is, in my opinion, Pixar's most underrated movie, Monsters University. This was probably the best movie to come out of the sequel era of Pixar. It's the perfect backstory to Monsters Inc. and I love the deep themes of the movie. Now we have the best Toy Story movie, Toy Story 2. This is just the perfect sequel to Toy Story. It expands the backgrounds of Buzz and Woody and really shows what their toys are based on. It introduces such iconic characters like Jessie and Bullseye, and it puts Woody in the place that Buzz was in the last film. Now to start our top 5, we have WALL-E. I really love this movie because it shows how over the course of human history, humans have created such great things that even a robot can connect to on such a deep level. But letting government get too powerful became their downfall. And by the end of the movie, they start over and create a new chapter for humanity. Now we have the best superhero movie in existence, The Incredibles. The best part of this movie is how every family member's power is reflective of their role in the family. And I love how instead of having an idol that becomes a twist villain, it has the main character turn down the kid who looks up to him. And that decision comes back to haunt him later in life. And it continues the theme of not living in the past and focusing on what's here and now.
But this, our family, is what's happening now, Bob. And you are missing this.
Next up on the list is Inside Out. So just to get this out of the way, the soundtrack is amazing. This movie just has so much personality, and once again it continues the theme of not focusing on the past but living in the present. Riley needs to learn that she shouldn't suppress her emotions and not look back on her life in Minnesota, but to also not miss what's happening right now in San Francisco. This movie just perfectly encapsulates the transition to adolescence. And on the topic of adolescence, my second favorite Pixar movie is Turning Red. And I know this movie only came out a couple months ago, but it's already a classic for me. I love how it's set in the early 2000s, and how all the kids in the movie interact with each other like real teenagers would. The soundtrack in this movie is amazing, not just for Four Town, but throughout the entire movie. But my favorite part about this movie is the final battle at the end. And that's just because this is the last movie I would expect to have a final battle. And I love how at the end, May introduces herself as a new person, in contrast to how she was at the beginning of the film. And I remember when I saw this for the first time, I just had no words to describe how much I liked this movie. And it's the movie that really started my channel. But now, in first place is Monsters Inc. I've been obsessed with this movie since I was 4 years old. But to quickly sum up why I like this movie, the first reason is the concept. Having monsters go through doors to scare children is just such an interesting concept. Second is the villain. Mr. Waternoose has clear motives that Sully agrees with in the beginning, and then learns throughout the movie the harm of scaring children. Third is the comedy, because the comedy is just hilarious in this movie. Mike and Sully just have such a funny dynamic and dialogue together. And the final thing I really like about this movie is how when they get banished, Mike and Sully clearly have different goals in life at this point. And later on they're able to work out their disagreement. And I also love how the ending scene leaves it up to the imagination what happens next. And that's my ranking of all 26 Pixar movies as of 2022. While you're at it, why don't you go check out my Lightyear theory about how Lightyear may not just be a movie within the Pixar universe. Thank you for watching, and bye.